This channel is about having reasonable and fair discussions in areas it's usually hard to talk about. We think there isn't enough of that in the world, and we'd like to help fix it. The Prophet of Zod, popular YouTube atheist, recently reviewed a video answering biblical contradictions by Christian apologist Kyle Butt. Here's what he did well and not so well. This is our review. The occasional snarkiness aside, I think Zod has some fair observations. He notes that Kyle's audience is other Christians, not skeptics. Much of what he says is not only unconvincing to a skeptical audience, but would seem to them condescending.
But a young man came to me and he said, "You have to admit, the Bible is full of errors." And he opened a folder and he said, "Look, here are hundreds of them. There are so many, you have to admit the Bible is full of errors." And then I asked him, "Have you looked at any single one of those, and which one do you think is the strongest?" He admitted, well, he hadn't looked at any single one. He just thought there were so many that one of them at least had to be a legitimate contradiction.
I have no reason to doubt that the story is true, but as Zod notes, it could come across as trying to paint all skeptics as uninformed. If we want to persuade someone, we should try our best to represent the other side as fairly as possible. I also appreciate that Zod grants the argument when Kyle makes a good point.
Sure. So for the sake of argument, he's 3 for 3 in this video.
So what is his argument then? Not that Kyle Butt didn't answer the contradictions, rather, he picked examples that were too easy to answer.
Mr. Butt's whole video is a bluff. Basically, he debunks 3 easy contradictions that he had chosen, as if that proves anything, then says I could do this all day, as if his self-selected soft pitches really represent the body of contradictions brought up by atheists.
Zod gives 2 better examples, the death of Judas and the resurrection accounts. The passages about the resurrection can be confusing, so it's understandable that this one would be brought up. The death of Judas, however, it's kind of surprising that Zod thinks this is such a good contradiction. Let's look at that one first.
How about the story of Judas's death? Matthew 27 describes Judas throwing his reward money at the priests in a fit of regret, then hanging himself at an undisclosed location. Only after this did the priests use the money to buy a field, which was named the Field of Blood because it was used for burials. Acts 1, on the other hand, shows Judas buying a field with the money and dying by falling headfirst when visiting it, and then says the field was called the Field of Blood because his guts went flying everywhere. These 2 stories obviously and without question contradict each other.
The question is, can someone who was hanged also fall and burst open? It's gruesome, but yes, that's exactly what happens when a hanged body is not taken down but left to decay. Not only can these 2 things harmonize, but one is the natural effect of the other. If the rope or tree limb doesn't break first, the body will decompose to the point where it can no longer hold its own weight, and as described bluntly in Acts chapter 1, Judas, falling headlong, he burst open in the middle and all his entrails gushed out. Matthew describes how Judas died, Acts describes the aftermath. What about the resurrection accounts?
Matthew 28 shows the 2 Marys already at the tomb when an angel shows up, rolls away the stone, and, with trembling guards present, tells them not to be afraid. Mark 16 shows the tomb already open when they get there, and the 3 women find a young man dressed in white robes as they enter. In Luke 24, 2 men appear to them, but only after they had entered and found Jesus' body was gone. And John 20 shows Mary Magdalene coming to the tomb and, after finding Jesus' body gone, going back to get the disciples. Only after they came back with her the second time and then leave, she looks into the tomb from the outside and sees 2 angels where Jesus' body had been. Then Jesus appears next to her and comforts her. Now obviously these 4 accounts are just riddled with obvious, irreconcilable contradictions.
He's right, the gospel accounts do differ, but is that necessarily a bad thing? I'm not so sure. If they were too similar, the accusation would be collusion, and that's exactly what is argued by skeptics when the gospel accounts record an event too similarly, that one copied from the other. When witnesses to a crime, for instance, agree too closely, that would make any detective suspect coaching or collusion. When they present their own varied perspective on an event, rather than discredit, it grants them more credibility. So, do the gospel accounts differ so much that they contradict, or only in the details they choose to include? Zod's first point:
when someone names 2 and only 2 people as having done something, the clear implication is that they were, you got it, the only ones doing it.
Yeah, this is not a very good argument. If I tell you my wife and I flew to New York, and you assume we're the only ones on the plane, you're going to get some funny looks when you ask us which one of us was the pilot. This is not a contradiction. Okay, what about the order of the events? Do they contradict? Let's take a look. Mark, Luke, and John all agree the stone had already been rolled away when the women got there. No contradiction yet. John adds that Mary Magdalene, seeing the tomb open, leaves before the rest of the women went in. Still, no contradiction, just additional detail. Now, can the passage in Matthew 28 harmonize as well? Sure. Verse 1 is typically understood that they headed off toward the tomb at dawn, not that they had already arrived. It's even translated this way in many versions. So, verse 1, they went to the tomb. Meanwhile, in verses 2 through 4, Matthew adds information about an earthquake and an angel scaring the guards away. When the ladies finally arrived in verse 5, they see the tomb open and speak with the angel, harmonizing fine with the other accounts. Are these passages confusing at first glance? Perhaps. Is it impossible to harmonize? No. Remember, the argument is not that it's unclear or confusing, rather that the two accounts are contradictory. That is, there's no possible way both statements can be true. Might there be other contradictions in the Bible? I'm open to it, but are these two examples contradictions? No. Calling something a contradiction is a high bar. If there's any possible way to reconcile the various accounts, then whether we like it or not, we can't fairly call it a contradiction. Maybe the explanation isn't credible for another reason, that's fine. Argue that reason. I'm open to that discussion, but we can't just start throwing the accusation of contradiction if there isn't one. Those are my thoughts. Whether you agree or disagree, was I at least fair? If so, give it a thumbs up. Did I miss something? Help me out. Leave a thoughtful comment below, and I'll think about it. If you want more, there's links in the description that go into a lot more detail about these and other biblical contradictions. If you have a favorite one that you've not heard answered to your satisfaction, let me know. I'll take a look at it.